Ever wonder how researchers get truly precise measurements of something as, well, personal and complex as your health?
Mm-hmm.
We're not talking about lab tests here, blood work or x-rays. We mean how you actually feel, your pain, your energy, how well you can get around day to day.
That's subjective experience, yeah.
Exactly. So today we're doing a deep dive into the pretty sophisticated science that makes sure these crucial patient-reported outcomes are as accurate, as fair, and ultimately as useful as possible.
It's a fascinating area.
Our journey takes us to the Patient-Reported Outcomes Measurement Information System, or PROMIS. Heard of it?
I have, yes. A major NIH initiative.
Right, ground-gripping stuff from the NIH. And we'll be unpacking a really interesting special report from a 2011 Psychometric Summit. This was where top investigators got together and really grappled with the challenges of making these health measures work for everyone.
That's right. And this dive, I think, will reveal the innovative thinking, the methods needed to ensure that when we ask patients about their health, we're genuinely capturing what matters. And crucially, doing it in a way that's comparable and unbiased, across all kinds of different people.
So moving beyond just like simple questionnaires.
Exactly. It's about getting truly meaningful data from these deeply personal experiences.
Okay, let's unpack this then. The story really kicks off back in 2002. The NIH launched its roadmap for medical research. Big ambition there.
Huge. Improve clinical research, improve health outcomes in the U.S.
And PROMIS was identified pretty early on as like a key piece of that roadmap, a core development.
Absolutely. PROMIS was specifically designed to create the next generation of patient-reported outcome measures, PROOs as we call them.
PROO, got it.
These are those direct reports from patients. Pain, fatigue, physical function things only the patient truly knows.
Right.
And to do this, PROMIS relies on some pretty powerful statistical methods, specifically item response theory, IRT, and computerized adaptive testing, or CAT.
Okay. IRT and CAT. Why are they such a big deal for this kind of measurement? What's the advantage over, say, just handing someone a standard paper questionnaire?
Well, think about it like this. Older tests often treat every single question as equally important, right? But IRT is smarter than that. It understands that some questions are much more revealing, more informative than others, depending on the person's level of, say, pain or function.
Okay.
It uses these advanced mathematical models to get more accurate, more trustworthy scores, especially if someone's health is way at the high end or way at the low end.
Right, where standard tests might not capture the nuances.
Exactly. And when you pair IRT with CCAT, well, CCAT is clever too. It selects the best questions for you based on how you answer the previous ones.
Ah, so it adapts the test on the fly.
Precisely. Which means you can get shorter tests that are actually more reliable. But the real magic, maybe, is that IRT lets us put different health scales onto a linked common metric, like a universal ruler for health feelings.
Wow, okay, that sounds incredibly useful.
It is. Ultimately, PROMIS aims to give researchers really precise information using the fewest possible questions. Which also means, less burden on patients and maybe smaller sample sizes needed for research.
That definitely sounds like a significant leap forward. But, measurement science never stands still, right?
Never.
So PROMIS didn't stop there. In 2009, the NIH funded a second wave, PROMIS II. What was new in PROMIS II? What fresh challenges popped up?
PROMIS II really widened the lens. It started incorporating longitudinal analyses, so tracking how people's health changes over months or years.
Ah, the time dimension.
Exactly. And it also deliberately included much more diverse populations, different backgrounds, different ages, with a much bigger emphasis on kids, on pediatric populations.
Which sounds vital, but probably complicated thing.
Oh, absolutely. These expansions were crucial, but they brought a whole host of what the experts called new psychometric challenges, really pushing the boundaries of what these measurement tools could do accurately and fairly.
So, to get a handle on these new complexities, the PROMIS investigators held this summit, September 2010.
The third PROMIS Psychometric Summit, yeah.
They came together to really pinpoint the toughest issues and figure out the best way forward, and those findings are what we're diving into now.
Let's do it.
Okay. This is where it gets really fascinating. The summit looked at 5 big themes, all critical for making sure these health measurements are accurate and fair. Let's start with a really fundamental one, making sure different measures are actually speaking the same language.
Comparability, yes. Crucial.
Right. Imagine you're trying to compare, say, physical function scores. You've got scores from a 10-year-old and scores from a 60-year-old. They answer different questions, obviously.
Yeah.
But how do you know if a score of 50 means the same thing for both of them. That's the challenge, right?
Yeah.
Linking scores.
Linking, exactly. It's like creating a kind of Rosetta Stone for these health questionnaires. It's all about statistically translating scores from one measure onto the scale of another one.
Cool.
And at the summit, David Thyssen highlighted a particular method called calibrated projection.
Calibrated projection. What made that a potential game changer?
Well, older methods sometimes relied on having identical questions across tests, which isn't always practical. Calibrated projection is more sophisticated. It's a full information approach using something called multidimensional IRT.
MyArt. Okay.
It essentially uses all the available response data to build a more accurate map of how different questionnaires relate, even if they don't share many items. It lets you model distinct but related things simultaneously.
So it gives researchers a more reliable way to compare apples to apples, even if the tests look different.
That's the goal. For instance, PROMIS planned to use it to link its pediatric scales and its adult scales. They'd have adolescents take both types of forms where possible and see if this calibrated projection method could put their scores onto the same adult metric reliably, making comparisons truly meaningful.
So better comparisons. But you mentioned preliminary results earlier. Was it always a slam dunk? Jinshe Lai looked at linking new questions into existing item banks. What did that work show?
Lai's work was interesting. It looked at both adult and pediatric data, and it found that, linking often improved the precision, the reliability of the measurement, especially in ranges where the scale was already working pretty well.
It refined things.
It refined things, exactly. It made the information more peaked in certain areas, but it didn't necessarily add a ton of new information in areas where the original scale was weak.
Okay.
So the takeaway was, yes, linking can help. It can improve accuracy, but its real utility kind of depends on what you plan to do with that item bank. What's the intended use?
That makes sense. Which brings us to another really critical issue. Fairness or bias.
Yes, differential item functioning.
DIF. Right, DIF. PROMIS aims for measures that work the same way for everyone, regardless of race, ethnicity, age, whatever. But what if? What if two people have the exact same level of, say, fatigue? But they answer a specific question about fatigue differently, just because one is older or maybe comes from a different cultural background.
That's DIF, right? Measurement bias.
That's exactly it. And DIF is a major problem because it severely limits our ability to make fair, valid comparisons between groups. If the ruler itself measures differently for different people, your comparisons are meaningless.
Or worse, misleading.
Or worse, misleading, absolutely. Jean Teresi at the summit really emphasized how critical it was to examine DIF, especially now that PROMIS II was including more diverse populations. She outlined a whole process, qualitative reviews, cognitive interviews with diverse people, forming hypotheses about why an item might be biased, carefully selecting anchor items.
It sounds thorough.
It has to be. And the summit actually featured detailed presentations of 3 different statistical methods for detecting DIF. And here's the really interesting part. They all use the exact same data set.
Oh, wow. Okay, what was the data?
It was data on PROMIS physical functioning items, specifically looking at potential age bias in older adults. And what did these 3 different methods find? Did they agree?
Well, that's the fascinating bit. First up was Adam Carl, using something called MIMS models.
MIMS?
Multiple indicator, multiple cause. His analysis found statistically significant DIF across several items. For 4 items, it seemed older people tended to report worse physical functioning than younger people, even when they had the same underlying ability level according to the model.
So the items made them look worse off than they were?
Potentially, yes. But then, for one specific item about washing and bathing oneself, the bias went the other way. Older individuals tended to endorse better functioning on that item.
Huh. That's counterintuitive.
Yeah.
And did this finding actually matter for the study's conclusions?
Hugely. This was critical. Before Carl accounted for this item-level DIF, the overall results suggested that older adults had significantly poorer physical functioning. Simple comparison.
Okay.
But after his model adjusted for the DIF, statistically removing that bias, guess what? The significant difference between the age groups vanished. They did not differ significantly anymore.
Wow. So ignoring the bias would have led to a completely wrong conclusion.
Potentially, yes. It really highlighted how vital it is to get the model right, to account for this stuff. Though it's worth noting, MIMIC models have some limitations, like difficulty detecting certain complex types of bias.
Okay, so that was method 1. What about the other 2? Did they find the same dramatic impact?
Well, method 2 was presented by Rich Jones. He used an expanded version, sort of a more flexible MIMIC model called MG-MIMI-UP. and looked at it longitudinally too.
Okay, more complex.
More complex, more flexible. It allowed for different patterns of bias across age groups and time, and guess what? It also found statistically significant DIF, but sometimes in different items than Carl's model found, and crucially,
Yes.
when Jones looked at the impact of the DIF detected by his model, it did not seem to lead to erroneous conclusions about the age groups. The overall finding about group differences held up, even with the bias present.
So his model found bias, but concluded it wasn't practically significant.
Essentially, yes. And then the third method, presented by Mukherjee and Crane, used a different approach, again, a hybrid statistical technique. They also found statistically significant DIF, again in slightly different items, and looked at it over time.
And their conclusion on impact.
Same as Jones's method, basically.
Huh.
While they found statistically significant DIF when they assessed its overall impact on the results, it didn't appear to substantively change the conclusions about age differences. They described the DIF impact as likely trivial.
Okay, hold on. So we have 3 different methods looking at the same data. All find statistically significant bias, but sometimes in different places. And they reach different conclusions about whether that bias actually matters for the bottom line results. One says it's critical, the other 2 say it's probably trivial. What does that tell you as a researcher?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The big takeaway from the Summit group was there's no single best magic bullet method for finding DIF. The choice of method depends on your data, your research question, what kind of bias you suspect. The strong recommendation was don't just rely on one method.
Use multiple approaches.
Use multiple approaches. Compare the results. Try to understand why they might be giving you different answers because the methods make different assumptions. And, maybe most importantly, always evaluate the practical impact. Does this statistical DIF actually change the story your data is telling? Or is it just, statistical noise?
That seems like a really crucial practical point. Okay, moving on. Theme 3 was dimensionality. Sounds important.
Very.
Let's imagine you have a questionnaire. It's supposed to measure just one thing, like pain severity. Simple enough. But what if some of the questions aren't just about severity? What if they accidentally tap into, say, anxiety about the pain or how the pain affects your daily activities? That's multidimensionality, right?
Right.
Measuring more than one underlying thing.
Exactly. And Steve Rise at the Summit really hammered this point home. He highlighted that many of these powerful IRT models we talked about earlier rely on an assumption of unidimensionality, that you're measuring just one single coherent construct.
Yeah.
But he argued there's often not enough understanding of what actually happens when that assumption is violated. When your data is actually multidimensional, but you force it into a simple unidimensional IRT model,
It messes things up.
it generally results in what he called a misspecified, latent variable, and spurious IRT parameters. Basically, you get distorted results. Your estimates of how difficult items are, how well they discriminate, they can be wrong.
So just trying to make your data unidimensional enough, maybe by throwing out a few awkward questions, isn't really good enough.
That was Rise's argument. Not good enough. He strongly advocated for researchers to compare their simple unidimensional models with more complex models that explicitly account for potential multidimensionality, specifically bifactor models.
Bifactor models, how do they work?
Think of it like this. A bifactor model assumes there's one main general factor that influences all the questions, like overall physical function. But it also allows for smaller, specific grouping factors that might influence only subsets of questions, like maybe questions specifically about upper body strength or balance.
Ah, so it models the main thing and potential side dimensions.
Precisely. It lets you empirically test how much of the response pattern is due to the main thing we want to measure versus these other potential nuisance factors. Is the multidimensionality actually a problem here?
Okay. And what about that adaptive testing, CAT? Doesn't that usually assume unidimensionality too?
It typically does, yes. And that's a limitation. Often, to make C work, researchers do remove questions that seem to introduce multidimensionality, but the cost is you might end up underrepresenting the full scope of the health concept you wanted to measure.
Right, you lose richness.
You lose richness. But Seung Choi presented work on a multidimensional C-CAT framework, MCAT. This was based on work by Li Kai, using his two-tier approach we might touch on later.
Okay, MPAT.
MCAT is designed to handle multidimensionality within the adaptive testing framework. It can accommodate more complex structures like those bifactor models or models where you have several correlated health traits you want to measure efficiently at the same time.
So MCAT sounds like a potentially much more powerful tool for getting a comprehensive picture.
Potentially, yes. Initial results suggested MCAT could be at least as efficient as standard CCAT, but with potentially much better validity because it's not forcing complex data into an overly simple model. It's especially good if you have a clear hierarchical structure you want to measure.
But that sounds like the catch, right?
Mm.
You need to be pretty confident about what that multidimensional structure actually looks like to use MCAT effectively. What if you're not totally sure?
That's a great point. Choosing the wrong complex structure could also introduce problems, and that's exactly where McKay Curtis's proposal came in. He suggested a Bayesian averaging approach.
Bayesian averaging.
Instead of forcing yourself to pick just one specific bifactor model, for example, his method embraces the uncertainty. It basically considers a whole range of plausible underlying structures.
How does it do that?
It uses Bayesian statistics to assign probabilities to different possible model structures or different parameter values within a structure, so it averages across the uncertainty rather than ignoring it. He showed an example with cognitive functioning data where this random bifactor model gave weight to the traditionally chosen structure and other plausible ones, leading to more robust, reliable inferences.
So acknowledging the uncertainty actually makes the final answer more trustworthy.
That's the idea. It's a more honest representation of what the data can actually tell you.
Fascinating. Okay, let's shift gears slightly.
Yeah.
Measuring health at one point in time is complex enough, but tracking changes over months or years, that adds another layer entirely. The summit also tackled how IRT models handle this longitudinal data.
Yes, tracking change over time is critical for understanding treatment effects, disease progression, recovery, all sorts of things. Jonathan Gruhl presented on hierarchical Bayesian approaches for this.
Okay, Bayesian again. Why is it good for longitudinal data?
Because longitudinal data has a natural nested structure, right? You have multiple measurements, multiple item responses nested within each person over time.
Right.
Bayesian hierarchical models are really well suited to handle that kind of structure. They let you model change at the group level, but also estimate how individuals might vary around that average change. They explicitly model the uncertainty at each level, uncertainty about item parameters, individual change trajectories, overall trends.
A much more nuanced picture of change.
A much more nuanced picture. Gruhl showed how these models could allow the average level of the trait to vary over time, while also accounting for those individual differences in change. He mentioned software like WinBudGS could be used for this.
Annalie Kai, whose name came up with MCAT, he also offered another sophisticated approach for longitudinal data.
Yes, Kai presented the application of his two-tier full information factor analysis approach to longitudinal problems.
Two-tier approach. How does that apply here?
He made a really interesting point. Even if you think you're measuring just one thing, like depression, at two different time points, the very fact that it's longitudinal data the same people measured repeatedly introduces a kind of statistical multidimensionality. Your measurements at time 1 are correlated with your measurements at time 2, beyond just the trait itself.
Because it's the same person.
Exactly. There's a dependency there. And his two-tier model is specifically designed to capture that structure effectively. It can model that conditional dependence that comes from repeated measures and let you examine how means and variances of the trait itself are changing over time while accounting for that dependency.
So what this all means is, both the Bayesian path and this two-tier approach, we're really opening up new possibilities for analyzing health changes over time, giving much richer insights.
Dramatically expanding the toolkit, yes. Moving beyond simply methods that might miss important nuances in how health evolves for individuals and groups.
Now, all these advanced methods are great in theory, but they're only useful if researchers can actually use them. The summit didn't just talk theory, it also showcased new software designed to make these complex analyses more accessible.
Absolutely crucial point. You need the tools. Two key software developments were highlighted at the summit. First, EQCert.
EQCert.
Its unique angle was bridging the gap between structural equation modeling, SEM, and IRT. Few programs at the time really did both well, the detailed response pattern IRT estimation and the kind of means and covariance analysis typical in SEM. EQCert aimed to make it easier to apply either approach and expand the scope to things like longitudinal IRT, multi-level IRT, models with covariates, multidimensional IRT, all with a user-friendly interface.
They're bringing these powerful techniques together in one package.
That was the goal, and the second one was IRT Pro. This software specifically implemented Lee Kai's two-tier approach we just discussed. It was designed to handle really high-dimensional IRT models, Lots of items, lots of factors. It could easily manage missing data, which is common in real-world studies, model that complex multidimensionality and bifactor structures, and directly address longitudinal questions. Plus, it had robust features built in for doing that DI testing we talked about earlier.
Wow, so these software advances were really key to translating all that methodological innovation into practice.
Absolutely critical. They empower researchers to actually do these more sophisticated analyses, moving the theory off the page and into the computer, making it feasible. Both EQCert and IRT Pro were anticipated for release around 2012, shortly after the summit.
Okay. We have covered a lot of complex ground here, from linking scales to bias detection, dimensionality, longitudinal models, new software. So let's try to synthesize. What are the big overarching messages, the key recommendations coming out of this Psychometric Summit for anyone involved in this kind of research, or even just interested in how scientific knowledge gets built?
Yeah, it's a lot. The summit wasn't intended to be a simple cookbook, follow steps 1, 2, 3, but several really vital recommendations emerged.
Okay, what's number one?
Number one, you must evaluate the assumptions of your IRT model, especially dimensionality. Don't just assume unidimensionality or conclude it's unidimensional enough without actually checking if forcing multidimensional data into that simple model is distorting your results.
Be critical of your own models.
Be critical. Number two, leverage the advanced models that are becoming available. Take advantage of computationally efficient approaches like the two-tier models or bifactor models when your data seems to have that kind of layered structure.
Use the right tool for the job.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when you're uncertain about the specific structure, those Bayesian approaches, like the random bifactor model or the hierarchical models for longitudinal data, offer really powerful ways to handle that uncertainty properly.
Yeah. Number three, linking. Be careful and precise. When you're trying to link scores across different scales, really think hard about whether those linked scores will be precise enough for what you plan to do with them. And always use an appropriate IRT model for the linking, whether it needs to be unidimensional or multidimensional.
Got it. And number four, must be DIF.
It has to be DIF, yeah. Number four, employ multiple methods for DIF analysis. Since we saw no single approach is universally best, use more than one. Compare the results, try to understand any differences based on the methods themselves. And critically, always evaluate the practical impact of any DIF you find. Does it actually change your conclusions?
Right. Don't just report p-values. Think about what it means.
Precisely.
So we connect this to the bigger picture. These recommendations, they aren't just technical details for stats nerds, are they?
Not at all.
They're fundamental to ensuring that these patient-reported outcomes, how people say they feel, are fair, accurate, and actually useful for improving healthcare, for making clinical decisions, for understanding if treatments work, for everyone. Absolutely. That's the whole point. The PROMIS cooperative group structure, bringing all these experts together, really enabled this continuous advancement in how we measure health-related quality of life. This summit showcased a new generation of IRT analysis methods and the software needed to use them.
Yeah.
Empowering researchers to tackle linking, DIF, dimensionality, longitudinal questions with way more sophistication than before. Challenges definitely still remain, but the commitment from the PROMIS investigators was clear. Keep pushing, keep refining to improve the quality, the integration, the application of PROs in medicine.
The paper reporting on this summit, it also included a kind of 5-year view. It was back in 2011. Looking ahead, what did they predict? What did they envision for the field by around, say, 2016?
Yeah, that's always interesting to look back on. They predicted that within 5 years, PROMIS-derived measures would become really key outcome variables, standard tools in clinical trials, and even potentially in clinical practice. They envision investigators routinely, not just occasionally, but routinely and robustly evaluating those core IRT assumptions like dimensionality. They expected researchers would consistently establish the validity of measures across diverse groups, really tackling that DIF issue head-on. And they thought researchers would regularly use these new methodological advances to solve dimensionality problems, not just ignore them.
So a real shift in standard practice.
A real shift. They also predicted that Bayesian techniques would become much more integrated into the IRT world, leading to more routine use of CAT for getting those precise yet concise patient reports.
And looking back now, from our vantage point, how did they do? Did those predictions come true?
It's quite remarkable. A lot of that has come to fruition. PROMIS measures are widely used in research, increasingly in trials. The awareness and the methods for dealing with dimensionality and diff are much more sophisticated now. Bayesian IRT is definitely more common. CAT is used more widely. They were pretty spot on, actually.
That's incredible. So the work done at that summit really did help shape the future of the field.
It certainly seems that way. It crystallized the challenges and pointed towards the solutions.
So the next time you listening, maybe fill out a health survey for your doctor, or you read about a clinical trial that uses patient self-reports, just remember the incredible depth of scientific thought and rigor that goes into making sure that questionnaire isn't just a bunch of random questions. It's not just about asking questions. It's about asking them in the most psychometrically sound way possible, trying to ensure the answers are truly meaningful, precise, and fair for everyone.
And I think the really profound insight, maybe, from digging into the summit is seeing how continuous this work is. Science isn't static. It constantly pushes us to question our assumptions, to explore new methods, to consider multiple perspectives, multiple methodologies, all to make sure our measurements get closer and closer to capturing the true, complex, diverse spectrum of human health and human experience.
Yeah, enabling better care, better research.
Ultimately, yes.
Well, that was a truly deep dive into the complex, sometimes arcane, but absolutely vital world of psychometrics, ensuring that the patient's voice, your voice, is heard, understood, and accurately measured. Thank you for joining us on the deep dive.
Thank you.
We really hope this has given you plenty to think about.